Russell Gold is an award-winning investigative journalist and staff writer and editor at Texas Monthy. He's covered stories like the Deepwater Horizon explosion for the Wall Street Journal. He's also started out his career right here for the San Antonio Express News. He's been a Pulitzer finalist twice. He is an author. He is an expert on energy and power. And, you know, as a matter of fact, your last book, Superpower, had to do with wind and some of the renewables that were out there. Russell Gold, thank you for joining us. We go back a ways, but let's not talk about that. I want to talk about the fact that you wrote an article recently about what happened roughly a year ago and just how close the state of Texas came to a catastrophe. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, so in the current cover article for Texas Monthy, we went back and looked at exactly what happened last February with the blackouts. And one of the things that really stunned me was the revelation that we came within 2, 3, 4 minutes of losing the entire grid. And what I mean by that is that the grid would have had to shut down, something that's never happened before in Texas, never happened before in the United States, and then been slowly built back up. You're talking about weeks without power in Texas. It was really stunning how close we came. As bad as things were, it was almost considerably worse.
Yeah, not a switch you can flip to turn things back on if that were to have happened. Nobody has forgotten about last year and millions of us being in the dark and the cold. Some 700 people died as a result of that. So the big question people want answered now is what has changed? So what, if anything, has changed as a result to hopefully prevent us from being in that situation again?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, the first thing that happened was that the Texas legislature, which was not planning to take up this issue, this happened right in the middle of the legislative session, they took up this issue and they decided that they were going to try to do some much needed reform. And they did accomplish, you know, to their credit, they accomplished a lot. Yeah, there's a new board at ERCOT, the grid operator, the Public Utility Commission has new members, and they put money and more inspectors to make sure this word of winterization, can our power plants run in cold weather? Because basically the Texas grid, we're set up to operate during that really hot July or August day when we're all cranking our air conditioner, and we've sort of fallen asleep a little bit about the real vulnerability, which is the winter time. But, you know, that solved some of the problems. It didn't really solve all of the pressing problems that led us to what happened last February.
A lot of the blame early on, it became very political, as all things do in the state of Texas and in the nation, really, these days. A lot of the blame early on from some of the Republicans was they say the renewables let us down, which is the solar and the wind and things like that. Other people say, no, it was the natural gas plants that let us down and the natural gas companies that made a lot of money out of what happened last February. Is there any truth to either one of those sides?
Well, there are 2 points you need to make. First of all, every single source of electrical power had problems. We had a nuclear plant trip off. We had gas plants go down, coal plants, wind and solar. Everything had problems during the winter. I really was actually very interested in getting an answer to that question as well. And so one of the things I did is I went and looked at the internal communications between the governor, between the key people running the grid, as this was happening and in the hours that led up to that. What were they concerned about? And I can tell you, nobody was concerned about the wind and what the wind was doing. The focus was 100% on the natural gas supply. Was natural gas getting to the power plants? Were the natural gas power plants running? And then in the minutes when the crisis really unfolded between 1 and 2 a.m. on the 15th, it was because natural gas plants failed. So I came to the conclusion that this really was a natural gas story. Yes, wind failed, there were wind farms that weren't producing electricity, but really at this point, the Texas electrical grid is a natural gas grid. If natural gas isn't working, the grid is not going to work either.
You talk about the legislature moving toward the effort of winterization, and we heard some criticism during that process about how some of the changes that lawmakers made didn't really have teeth to them to make sure that companies were abiding by that, essentially making sure that their infrastructure is set up to handle another storm like that. So do you think, in all the reporting that you have done, that if we were to see another storm like we did last year, we're in any better position?
I think we would have problems if we had a storm similar to what we saw last year. And there's a very simple reason for it. For our system to work, for electricity to be flowing, we need both the power plants to be winterized, but we also need the natural gas delivery system to be winterized. And we have taken strides to prepare the power plants to run. We haven't done enough on the natural gas side. And by that, I mean the pipelines, the compressor station, all of the different pieces of infrastructure that are needed to move gas out of the Permian Basin and out of South Texas, the Eagle Ford, to the power plants. That has not been sufficiently winterized. We still have problems. And in fact, we saw that at the beginning of this year on January 2nd, when it got down to about 19 or 20 degrees in Midland out in the Permian Basin, and 25% of the natural gas failed to come through. That was just a very short freeze, very short cold period. I'm still very concerned that we haven't really tackled the big issues that will prevent this from happening again.
Russell Gold with Texas Monthy, a great article this month, cover story. He has two books, one called The Boom, which is on fracking, and one called Superpower, which is on wind. Always great to talk to you, and I appreciate your time. I hope you come back with us sometime.
I'd love to. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Myra.
Take care. We'll be right back.